My name is Christopher Peter and welcome to the Christopher Peter Review. The Christopher Peter Review provides original content discussing salient current events in our political environment, business community, global world, domestic society, and sports and entertainment. In each of the 5 segments, the focus will always be to center on facts, evidence, and data. Please experience the 5 podcast segments that make up the Christopher Peter Review. My name is Christopher Peter. I am the political economist behind the Christopher Peter Review. I welcome you back to my new podcast series, the Christopher Peter Podcast, where I will discuss a broad range of topics, centered on investing, but will also include business and industry current events, brand analysis, sports, and entertainment, and more. I will continue to bring my economic perspective but will also look at topics with an investor's eye. Our last discussion focused on the investor. What made a good investor? What traits define them? How they are able to identify opportunities, risks, and rewards before most people realize. How investors afford entrepreneurs, organizations, and even the governments the capital or funding to make economic activity possible or public projects a reality. We also discuss the investor perspective. How one can benefit by taking investor traits and applying them to our everyday life. Now, we are going to have a discussion over different asset classes that investors may hold. Just for educational purposes. Which will help in future discussions when we begin discussing brands and their financial data. I was going to discuss assets in this episode, but I decided to table that until next week. Instead, I want to discuss the importance of having the right economic system that affords people the power to control their own economic outcomes. And the right perspective when we make economic decisions that impact our outcomes. We need an economic system that empowers the people to innovate in ways that improves our quality of life, challenges the limits of human achievement, and creates opportunity for not only the entrepreneur, but investors, workers, suppliers, other nodes of the value chain, consumers, and society. Of course, I am talking about free market capitalism. The controversial, yet best performing and most effective economic system the world has ever known. There is no other system that can claim to sustainably elevate people out of poverty than free market capitalism. There is no perfect economic system. All have some perceived good and known drawbacks. But free market capitalism has performed well in comparison to other systems in a manner that has stood the test of time when you look at the long-term and bigger picture. While some hold a rational resentment for the disparity in compensation, it offers people the greatest ability to uplift themselves through innovation, hard work, and ambition. So, what is free market capitalism? Capitalism is the economic system involving the use of markets in determining what is produced, how much is produced, and the cost based on the actions and behaviors of market participants. Free market capitalism involves the limiting of government involvement in the markets, allowing consumers and producers to engage to decide economic solutions that best fit societal needs. Ideally, the rule creator would not be a participant in the marketplace because it could skew the outcomes. We have seen negative outcomes in markets where the government intervenes too greatly or overregulates, creating real economic harm to the market. In its purest form, free market capitalism affords consumers and producers the power to determine what gets produced, how much gets produced, and what price the goods and services will be sold at. These decisions are made in daily transactions that are aggregated to determine the market demand and supply for a given market price. Again, in its purest form. In America, we do not have free market capitalism in its purest form. So why is this important? What makes America unique in the global economic environment is the opportunity afforded to Americans to elevate their standing in life through a variety of different avenues including, but not limited to innovation, entrepreneurship, or corporate or government employment. Free market capitalism allows people to determine their own economic outcomes. There are many people who are naively sympathizing with economic systems like socialism. While economic systems like socialism may sound appealing, the reality based on facts and evidence shows that the upside of the economic system is fleeting, and the downsides are long-lasting and harmful. Also, people living in socialist economies are not truly in control of their lives. They serve as a worker in a government-controlled economic production unit. They lack the choice, true freedom, and ability to customize their lifestyle. Because socialist economies focus on the collective good, not the individual. So, if your needs and wants are more expensive than your neighbors, there is a good chance you will not see much sympathy for your plight. You get what the government is willing to give you. I think the problem people have with free market capitalism is the perception of fairness. But I am not sure the definition of fairness is based on reality. My definition of economic fairness is that each individual has the same opportunity to achieve their preferred lifestyle supported by the chosen level of effort, skill set, ambition, and productivity. That each person is held to the same standard and enjoys the ability to determine and pursue their personal definition of success independent from others. The problem is there are people who see fairness being some guarantee that they are given an equal share of everything regardless of how much they contributed to it. I believe most rational people believe that you earn your keep in life. I believe the counter viewpoint is based on some level of personal dissatisfaction with their own outcomes in life. For instance, there are many people who talk about the perceived fairness of compensation for specific job categories. Not that long ago, I had a conversation with a person who questioned why teachers are paid so little when compared to a hedge fund manager. Successful hedge fund managers can make a really good living. The average teacher is destined to be in middle class at best, based solely on their compensation, not considering other income or compensation. Let us take a deeper look at the issue. While successful hedge fund managers are what we normally see, there are many people who fail at this profession and never make it to the level of what is considered success. The field is highly competitive and requires high performers to deliver consistent value and returns for investors or partners. The field also weeds out poor performers. We do not commonly talk about those who do not make it. I believe educators are vital to society. But their collectively bargained employment environment restricts individualized performance-based compensation and is highly focused on protecting the herd rather than compensating exceptional performance. Therefore, great teachers will not reap the benefits of outperforming their peers. Rather, the pool will be kept closely aligned with one another. Poor performers will also be better protected in the herd mentality. As I have spoken about many times in the Christopher Peter Review, people want to stand out. If you pay people the same, they will differentiate themselves in the level of effort and productivity. They will maximize their value by reducing the quality of work and time spent. That is just human nature. If you cannot remove the bad performers, the whole herd will eventually lower their performance because there is no real motivation. Raising uniform compensation will not rectify the problem. Just make the situation more expensive. Not a theory. We are seeing this in real life. In reality, I passionately believe that people should focus more on maximizing their own outcomes and expanding their own opportunities rather than worrying about limiting the success for others who work a lot harder than their detractors are willing to credit them with. If someone is making more than you, the real question should be what you can do to reach that level of income or advance your current standing. It does you no good in the long run to obsess about how to drag someone else down to make you feel better about your situation. The parents of one of my college friends were both teachers. Rather than complain about compensation, they were avid investors, who successfully retired early and enjoyed financial security that many teachers in their area did not. Simply because they were hard workers, savers, and investors. Learned a great deal from them during my time around them. Perspective matters. It matters in life, in business, in politics, and in economics. The perspective of how we view our problems will determine whether our solutions will be effective. The purpose of discussing the investor perspective was not to promote the lifestyles of investors or sympathize with investors who struggle, but to take attributes that are transferable to all areas of life. In regard to economic systems, there are clear differences in the perspective that matter to outcomes. Like investors, a person with a capitalist mindset will always seek first what opportunities are out there to make tomorrow better than today. In contrast, a person with a socialist mindset will focus on what society should do to fix my personal situation. A person with a capitalist mindset, if they lose their job, will focus on not only finding a new job, but other avenues of securing income to meet their needs until they land their new position. And may even go further to ensure that they are not completely reliant on that position by seeking ways to diversify income streams to ensure they never face that situation again. A socialist will immediately see what social programs are out there, passively looking for a new position, waiting until their benefits are near expiration before really taking the search seriously. Statistics traditionally show that most people find their new jobs close to the date that their benefits are due to expire. Now everyone has unique situations in life. But I believe the focus should always be on finding opportunities to make your tomorrows better than today's. A personal story that fits here is upon the completion of both my degrees, I found myself looking for jobs after unexpected events. As I was near completion of my undergraduate degree, the position that I was supposed to turn into a full-time position suddenly lost funding 3 weeks before graduation. Conveniently, right after the traditional recruiting cycle began. Some suggested that I file for unemployment, which was not a bad suggestion, but I am one who likes to make my own way in life. Instead, I decided to take a sales job to earn income while I searched for a more permanent position. I am not a natural salesperson, being an introvert. But I felt that I can learn something that may be useful later on in my career. It was not a fruitful pursuit, but I was able to pay the bills until I found another position. But I learned a great deal. Following the completion of my MBA, I had a postgraduate position cancelled due to the declining economic climate at the time. Again, I decided that I would not file for unemployment, rather I chose to take advantage of opportunities in the gig economy to cover my expenses until I found another role shortly after. I had a friend tell me, who was in a similar position, questioning how I remained positive despite the situation. I replied that I could not control the economic condition of the organization that I hoped to work for. But I would not allow myself to be a victim of circumstance. And the change in plans might be inconvenient, but it would be a blip on the timeline of my career if I stayed vigilant and focused on securing roles and investing to blunt impact of these types of events. I recently heard a business-related podcast episode where an entrepreneur talked about taking 100% accountability in life. Regardless of what happens, always accept responsibility for not only your role in the event, but for the whole situation. On face value, it might seem like an impractical idea. If you get in a car accident where someone hits you, why should you accept responsibility for another person's actions? But, if you look at it from a perspective of what could have been done differently to prevent you from even being involved in the accident, it may help you avoid situations that can lead to future adverse outcomes even when you are not at fault. The overall goal should be that we are championing our futures and not resorting to being victims of circumstance. If we see the world as a person with a socialist perspective, we will always place blame and responsibility externally. Rely on others to ensure that we have the things in life that we need. Rely on others to protect us from harm. Rely on others to make our dreams come true. If we take the perspective of a capitalist, we will take responsibility for our outcomes and maximize areas in our life that we completely control or have major influence in and position ourselves to be the best version of ourselves. We must accept the reality that no one owes anybody anything other than to do no harm to them or their property. We are a rugged, self-reliant free society. We should champion our own success rather than play victim to circumstance, which is what I aim to help people avoid. In my next episode, I am going to discuss different assets that I will consider investing in. Then I will let you know which ones made the cut, why and how I think it may help me make this new fund beneficial to my efforts with the CRC channel and my podcasts. Please continue to visit the CRC channel at www.crcchannel.com and experience my main podcast, The Christopher Peter Review, at www.crcreview.com. I thank you in advance for your viewership and look forward to our next discussion. My name is Brad and welcome to the CRC World, where I discuss salient global current events that have a great impact here in America with political economist Christopher Peter. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has changed the global infrastructure for diplomacy. The world is no longer working in a semi-united fashion. There are clear factions growing. On one side, there is the Alliance of the West, NATO, featuring America, our European allies, and other non-NATO nations. On the other side, Russia and China are forging their own alliance with other nations who do not place a great deal of faith in democracy, freedom, human rights, or sovereignty. Recently, the NATO alliance grew by one nation. It may grow more in the future, but one nation has officially joined. That one nation being Finland, which is a hop, skip, and a jump from Russia. For a long time NATO was cautious to recruit neighbors of Russia. But Russia invading its neighbors has a way of shifting the traditional dogma of those who fear they may be a future target. NATO was cautious with expansion for great reason. The global alliance pledges to defend one another under the mantra that an attack on one may be considered an attack on all. There are obviously procedures and protocols that dictate how to classify events. But there is great risk in admitting a nation that may be a convenient target for the common enemy. A nation that may draw the ire or aggression from that enemy unjustly or by an unintentional misunderstanding. Especially if that nation is unable or unwilling to defend itself or live up to the commitment expected of the entire alliance. We do not want to be drawn into a conflict because of a misunderstanding caused by a partner more dependent on the alliance than it contributes to. We have to be honest and acknowledge that many of our NATO partners were lax about real threats from Russia over the years. Many did not fully commit to defense spending requirements. Many even became economic allies of the nation the whole alliance was formed to protect against. The Soviet Union may be no more. But we still needed to be concerned over the Russian threat and the potential for a repeat of Soviet-style behaviors. We generally observe remembrance for the great atrocities as a constant reminder to not repeat the past. But, in this instance, we might have dropped the ball. America was seen as extreme and outdated for raising the issue. We can recall all the progressives who said the 1980s wanted their foreign policy back. But a Russian president with 1980s ideals decided to cross into its neighbor because it wanted its former property back. Sadly, we did not heed the warning right away. Our world changed when Russian troops crossed the Ukrainian border. Not the first time. Not when they amassed troops for half a year. But the last time because we all feared this might be different. Fortunately, the brave people of Ukraine have defied the odds and stood up quite nicely to the Russian threat. We should not be surprised that nations like Sweden and Finland would run towards NATO following the threats. Nations that could theoretically be future targets if we are unable to stop Russia in Ukraine. We are not fighting side by side because Ukraine is not a NATO ally. Does it make sense to expand when there is a potential to be drawn into a conflict? There is not a single nation that wants World War III to become a reality. Other than Germany, there is no NATO member that wanted World War I or World II either. But, they happened. We cannot avoid doing the right thing out of fear of what the bad entity will do in response. We cannot apply the same failed progressive domestic policies to our foreign policies. We can add new partners, even ones close to the shared enemy. But, we must insist that they share our values, our interests, and are able to comply with the tenets of the treaty relatively close to them joining. There is no wiggle room. One thing to consider is that a conflict is not an automatic trigger of the clause where an attack on one is an attack on all. There are procedures to evaluate the events. Also, the directly impacted nation will have to play a central role in the response efforts. So, it would not be a situation where Finland gets attacked and Americans are fighting while the Finns watch. We let our collective guard down for a long time and now we must come together and modernize our approach. Obviously Russia and China have their own conflicting agenda. We need to modernize our approach as an alliance militarily, diplomatically, and economically. What would that look like? I believe we need to ensure that our trade reflects our strongly held principles of democracy, freedom, and human rights. We should engage with economic trade with our allies who share these values, and ones that are willing to accept these values. The appeal of cheap manufacturing labor has made us dependent on a nation that views us as both a military and economic enemy. We are reliant on nations for energy that do not value human life and sponsor horrendous acts of terror across the globe. This is not sustainable. We are sponsoring our own security threats. Why is America and Europe turning to our collective enemies rather than each other for trade, partnerships, and cooperation? We need to stop seeking partnerships of temporary convenience and focus on strengthening our alliances with partners who share our core shared values. I do not think it is a radical idea. We do want a world that is willing to trade across the globe. But, we must acknowledge that there are real threats in this world and that not everyone wants to be our friend. I thank you for experiencing this episode, the CRC World. Come back for more each week. Welcome to CRC Sports, where we discuss salient current events in the world of sports. As I stated on the Christopher Peter podcast episode, Innovation in Sports and Entertainment, I am a fan of the new rule changes that Major League Baseball. I think it makes the game more enjoyable and removes the lulls in play. The games now fit in a somewhat predictable time frame. Baseball is the only untimed sport. In football, basketball, hockey, and soccer, these team sports are all played with a clock. The 48, 60, or 90 minutes may not be the actual time frame of the game, but at some point the clock will run out. For baseball, the 9 innings could drag on for some time. Even in the sport of tennis, the governing bodies of the majors and other big tournaments ended lulls in play with a serve clock. The adjusting of batting gloves, digging dirt from the batter box, or drying sweat off a tennis racket, are all things that just waste the viewer's time. Important for the players, but can be done in a more expedient time. The impact of these changes in baseball apparently has led to decreased beer sales from beverage providers that Major League Baseball teams rely on for sponsorship and revenue. Makes sense. Fans spending less time in the ballpark means less time for food and beverage purchases. Especially in stadiums that limit beer sales.
The recent pushback came from a pitcher from our favorite team, the Philadelphia Phillies, where Matt Strom questioned whether the extension of beer sales was the right call given the risk it could have on drunk driving. The intent of cutting off sales by the 7th or 8th inning was to give in-stadium fans a couple innings before they depart to sober up to a point where it is more likely they can make it home safely without incident. There is a legitimate question of whether baseball teams should place greater importance on the potential safety of their fans or the revenue losses for its sponsors and themselves, which will eventually impact the organizations.
In our society these days, it is very easy to jump on one side of the argument and pretend like the other side does not matter. The safety of the fans is obviously of the utmost importance to the teams, the league overall, and the sponsors. I do not think any of these parties want to see any fans potentially lose their lives to drunk driving or cause any loss of life or property damage or other consequence of impaired driving. There also is the ability to look into the issue beyond the surface. Does this change really make a difference in the big picture? There are some realities that we may overlook. There are many fans who do not stay through the end of the game. Some fans who, once the alcohol stops in the stadium, will choose a seat at the local bar to catch the final outs. Avoid the outpouring of fans on the road and then have your next spot for entertainment. Still potential danger, but something people do. Interesting to see if there is even a noticeable increase in sales, or if the shorter time people are spending at the parks will even lead to greater consumption with the expanded sale time. I do generally think that having a cool-off period can be helpful. I think most people who go to games, whether it is in Philly, New York, or other parks, will have 1 or 2 rounds at the park and institute their own cool-off period.
I think also many people will do what is normally known as pre-gaming before entering the stadium, which reduces the cost of the event. Why buy high-priced beer when it is much cheaper from your local beer or liquor store? Also, I do think the cool-off period might not be used by heavy drinkers. We have seen people leave early to enjoy a beverage at other watering holes.
There are many times when I have left games to visit bars and see more competitive matchup on their television. At the same time, I am not what anyone would consider a heavy drinker. But I am not sure we can prescribe to the notion that if ballparks cut off the supply, then drivers will be safer without any consideration of unexpected events. From the arena's perspective, the liability or responsibility now would shift from the stadium to the bar that person enters. In some states, regulations hold bars accountable for serving patrons who appear inebriated elsewhere. The chain of liability. If the person leaves one bar and makes it to another, then that person causes an accident. That final bar may face claims that it allowed an inebriated person to leave intoxicated. In reality, every place that person left played a role. Technically, that person played the greatest role of any.
Society does not hold people accountable for their own choices. Rather, the blame is reassigned to the party with the deepest pockets. Rather than worrying a great deal of when the beer is sold, maybe we should consider who it is sold to. Should vendors be cautioned in serving people who are clearly intoxicated or demonstrating some level of impairment? Or should there be a limit on how many a person can buy during a game, rather than focusing solely on the time it is sold? Certainly we do not want road beers being out there. But there are different ways to get the same goal of fans safely making it home.
The biggest challenge for society is when there are large crowds and the inability to ensure that negatives will not happen. And situations when we want to believe strict rules will solve our problems, when in reality, it might not. We can say that loss of revenue is not an excuse to allow for any potential for loss of life. But we cannot assume that the status quo is any safer than this slight change.
Finally, the Philadelphia Eagles reached an agreement to extend the contract of star quarterback Jalen Hurts by 5 years for a total value of $255 million with $179 million guaranteed. An agreement that makes Jalen Hurts the highest paid player in the league for now. We can probably project that contracts for Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert might be slightly more. I guess because they were first-round picks. Although Burrow has a similar resume as Hurts. The agreement is also team-friendly, considering it is only $36 million per year guaranteed. A great day for Eagles fans.
I agree that this is a great deal for the Eagles, Jalen Hurts, and the fans. Jalen Hurts gets better and better each year. He is clearly driven to be a better version each and every game. Each and every year. And he is a natural leader. Who leads by example and with humility. He does not talk. Does not brag. Just performs, improves, and focuses on what is ahead. He is the perfect quarterback for Philadelphia that values grit and grind. And for a league that has too many divas in too many positions. Many sports pundits are immediately comparing the negotiations with other ones currently going on or ones that will take place very soon. If we compare these negotiations that were relatively quick and drama-free with the ones taking place an hour or so south of Philadelphia, I believe there's a stark difference from an organizational perspective. The Eagles seem to look for reasons to want Jalen Hurts as the quarterback of the future. They drafted him in the second round when some initially thought it might be too high. Instead of putting all the onus on Hurts to prove himself, the front office showed that they were an active partner in the process by giving him a supporting cast that helped him elevate his play and lead a team with great synergy all the way to a Super Bowl appearance. It was clear at the beginning of the year that the 2022 season would be a prove-it year. And the Eagles gave him a real opportunity to do just that. In contrast, we see a contentious negotiation taking place with the Baltimore Ravens and their star quarterback Lamar Jackson. The Ravens appear to be taking a different path and sitting back a bit and wanting Jackson to prove it despite being a league MVP. A unanimous one at that. Seemed like they always had more questions even when answers were clearly there. Clearly there was hesitation on the part of the front office who did not jump at the opportunity to commit early when they probably should have. They took the risk by trading back into the first round to draft Jackson. But there seemed to be reservations to make that risk a long-term commitment. At the same time, I do think that Jackson probably could help his situation with the assistance of a certified agent because negotiations can be personal and that wall may be helpful. Also, the anchoring to what the rest of the industry holds as an outlier agreement does not seem to be fruitful. I can understand trying to secure the same fully guaranteed agreement another player received. But, I also can understand other organizations not wanting to make the same perceived mistake that a team like the Cleveland Browns may have made. An organization that has not shown a great level of sustained success or steady leadership. Any successful negotiation requires both sides or parties to agree that both are better together than apart. And to have a realistic set of trade-offs that can be accommodated. Negotiations are a give and take. If one side perceives to be giving more than it is allowed to take, then an impasse is inevitable. Sometimes you need a professional who can get creative and find solutions that bridge the gaps and allow enough of the must-haves on both sides to be met. Congratulations to Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles. Hopefully I will be able to experience another Super Bowl parade soon. Thank you for experiencing CRC Sports.
I am Adriana and welcome to the CRC Society, where I debate salient current events impacting our overall society with fellow members of the CRC team. Our political discourse continues to center around the former President Donald Trump, who is a convenient topic for the political press. The former president is swarmed by controversial investigations into hush money payments, handling of classified documents, and other lawsuits. Trump has been a lightning rod for criticism and the main target for Democrats since he pulled off a major upset victory over Hillary Clinton. Trump is a convenient topic for night shows because he is a ratings draw. And a convenient distraction from the reality of the current state of the American society and economy.
Former President Donald Trump is a complex persona in our political atmosphere and overall society. He is the one person who generates an instant reaction, good or bad, from every American. Someone that everyone has an opinion on, fairly or unfairly. What even makes him more complex in America is the convolution people have to sort out over what is actually legitimate controversies and what are politically generated ones. The truth really is that it's a mixed bag to some degree. We know that Democrats will go to great lengths to attack their political opponents not concerning themselves with facts or truth. If the lie sounds good, they will repeat it until enough people hear it until they believe it is true. How many of our tall tales start? No person has drawn their ire as much as Donald Trump. Democrats have not gotten over the 2016 presidential election, as we see what is going on in New York and Manhattan and with the state attorney general. The indictment appears to be really weak and the controversial prosecutor aims to elevate what normally would be a misdemeanor into a felony, which is clearly biased and inappropriate. Laws should be enforced. But in a consistent manner. Not with political motivation. The whole legal system in America is based on precedent. So when you fail to prosecute crime and certain crimes are traditionally handled a certain manner, there is no doubt there is bias. But, we continue to see people who carry the badge of being a progressive feel that it is their right to use their positions to drive political agendas voters did not elect them to do. Most rational people would not have wasted time with this case. There are plenty of settlements made by politicians, businesses, and high-profile people. Many prosecutors drop charges when parties reach out of court settlements all the time. So Trump should not be treated outside the norm just because one does not agree with his political views or personal behaviors. The issue for the public is what is true and what is fabricated. We do not really know for sure. But, the political objective may be just to create such hysteria and tension that people will just reject Trump. The biggest challenge for Democrats is that Joe Biden is severely underwhelming, making Trump a real threat to regain the office. For Trump supporters, they are hoping enough people are willing to set aside personal disdain for Trump's chaotic social media content and erratic behaviors to accept the economic and security policies that were effective and well liked in favor of the status quo that is not working for anyone. The question is whether the Democratic campaign will be effective or if Trump can change the narrative. I think there is clear data that shows that both Republicans and Democrats want new and fresh candidates with effective ideas. Democrats want an alternative to Biden who is clearly not in full capacity. But, they do not have a likable alternative. They are at a point where many of the candidates in their pipeline were ineffective in the roles they would use to qualify themselves for a run or too fringe to connect with voters outside of the far reaches of the left. Early polling shows Trump with a viable path to the nomination. But, I think many Republicans would prefer a candidate like DeSantis who can deliver the same results in a more calm and predictable manner. And the indictment and continued attacks are rallying some towards Trump because some do view Trump as a victim and not a contributor to his own problems. The challenge Republicans face in their nomination process is avoiding a situation where voter blocs will get so intensely loyal that they will not unify in the general election. That is what Democrats hope for. In 2024, I think Biden will be the Democratic nominee if he can maintain his health. Right now, it looks like a rematch of 2020. But, a lot can change between now and then. For many of us, we hope that is the case, so we can see both sides nominate candidates that are more aligned with our needs and shared values.
I agree that our political choice set needs a refresh. The Trump era was economically productive and secure, but chaotic and challenging at the end. The Biden era is a disaster in every way possible. I think Americans are growing tired of having to pick the lesser of two bad choices and need to return to a time when we could truly believe in our candidates. I do think more Trumpers are solidly Trump while most Biden backers are more anti-Trump than pro-Biden. Again, Biden still has time to reconsider running again. And Republicans may decide to go with a candidate that can achieve the same policy agenda that afforded economic growth and national security without the hysteria and chaos. Time will tell. Thank you for experiencing the CRC Society on the Christopher Peter Review. Please come back next week for more.
Welcome to the CRC Conversation on the Christopher Peter Review, where we discuss leading current events impacting our economy, public policy, and society. We will begin our discussion on the state of our economy. The March inflation data showed that inflation has dipped. It is now hovering around 5%. Some relief for consumers and business buyers. But we are still far away from the traditional target of 2%. And based on the pace of the decline, it may be a while before we reach that level again. But a concern should be that we are seeing a sustained increase in the price of fuel in some markets, which is not ideal. But, expected as oil producers cut supply.
I think we can all admit that the Federal Reserve was late to the party in regard to addressing inflation. They relied on hope before having no other choice but to raise interest rates. But their rate increases are proving effective in lowering inflation in a slow and steady manner. There have been some side effects of this policy approach, which we are seeing now. Banks are now seeing their investment strategies impacted with failures taking place. But this is a situation where the ends justify the means because there really is no other policy alternative. The need was to temper demand until supply can reach a sustainable equilibrium. Therefore, we needed to raise the cost of economic activity to make those parties rethink their activity or reduce the level or frequency. This includes buyers of big-ticket items and business buyers procuring production inputs. Also, the free money or easy money era that investors enjoyed since the financial crisis is now over. And we are seeing companies rethinking their financial strategies. Politically, I think we can expect to see many politicians take credit for the decrease. I saw a Political Action Committee commercial while I was at the gym asking people to thank Joe Biden for the Inflation Reduction Act. A clear message that many will feel is clear disinformation. The Biden team did little to rein in the rabid inflation they fueled with unnecessary spending upon coming into office. The credit goes to the Federal Reserve and Chairman Jerome Powell.
Politicians always will try to connect themselves to the positives and deflect blame for negatives. As you always say to our audience, it all depends on the outcomes of the actions they put in place. And the policies enacted by the Biden administration and congressional Democrats have not met the challenge. Another side effect, and one that the Biden team will want to wish away, appears to be a recession that we are no longer going to be able to avoid. There were many politicians and pundits hoping for a soft landing, but that does not seem to be in the cards. The question seems to be not if we experience a recession but when it will finally come or be fully realized.
There always is a good side and downside to every policy action. And sometimes, policymakers have to choose the lesser of two evils. Where there is no good side, just less downside. I believe the esteemed economists leading the Federal Reserve along with Chairman Powell had this choice set. They had to determine whether it was worse for the American economy to continue on a path of high inflation that may even rise to higher levels or a recession that may harm employment, financial stability, and growth. I think inflation is the worst of both negatives. So, it makes sense to focus on addressing that evil while keeping a watchful eye on the other. Ideally, the economy will be able to reset and come back with growth in both wealth and employment. This is not the choice set Americans expected to face. Not the choice set for an economy that was supposed to be built back better. But we have to deal with our reality, not what we hoped for. Or who expected this to be the case with a shaky economic agenda.
When you are not good at your job, you simply hope that there is something positive to show. In the case of the economic performance, the The positive area that the Biden administration is messaging to the public is that the job numbers are still decent. Although there are some areas of concern. Cherry-picking the positive is not a sign of great stewardship of our economy.
Yes, the job numbers are still decent on face value. But I think we are concerned about whether the economy is producing jobs that are fruitful or just going to continue producing minimum wage jobs that many have tried to avoid since the pandemic started. There are many low-wage employees who tried to avoid returning to their prior places of employment. Some may have improved their skill set through education, career development, or leveraged what they learned to secure more profitable opportunities compared to where they were previously. But others just held out hoping that their employers would raise wages, which many did. But I think many of the remaining holdouts realize that it is not the time to continue sitting out when there is a negative outlook for the economy. Also, many people are finding second places of employment or side gigs to fund large purchases or fill budget holes. There are more news stories concerning planned layoffs than ones announcing companies expanding their rosters.
Now, let us move to another story making headlines. There is a major controversy going on with Anheuser-Busch with a Bud Light brand partnership that connects the brand with a controversial trans influencer. In a free nation, you should have the freedom to be what you want to be. At the same time, people also have the freedom to not associate themselves with political or social issues for whatever reason they choose to. The real controversy was caused by the vice president of marketing for the Bud Light brand who really did not know their customer base and how that partnership would cast attributes that they would rather not be associated with. For a fratty beer brand, she did not want to be a fratty beer brand. Should this be a controversy?
In marketing, it is important that marketers know their customers. Promotions and advertising usually highlight the commonalities of the consumer segments. For marketers that want to build upon that, you usually do so with close associations. Or by marketing to the broadest spectrum of society. I think the real controversy is bad marketing. Wanting more inclusiveness is not a bad thing. But I think her objective was more political than it was about diversity. How does making a person from the smallest demographic in society the focal point of your brand broadening your product's appeal? How is that really going to increase sales? Again, a better marketer would show diverse groups doing activities that are commonly associated with their products. Or activities that are a natural extension of their product. Bud Light is a cheap beer that serves fratty beer consumers. If they wanted to elevate it, maybe focus on diverse young professionals. Maybe show it is not just good for football and baseball, but soccer as well. There is a clear political focus here because of the overall political agenda that is clouding the nation. I am not a big fan of tribalism in society. Many attributes better associated with individual persons become stereotypes for large groups of people. But you normally see there being a sympathetic response to the victims' community following a tragic event. Following the anti-Semitic incidents in recent years, there was strong messaging supporting the Jewish community and denouncing hate. Same thing happened with the response to the rise in crime against Asian Americans, where society denounced hate and showed support for Asian Americans. That was not the case following the tragedy at the Christian school in Nashville. The community of the perpetrator was given the support that traditionally would have been shown towards Christians, who were impacted by the violent event. I think the VP of marketing at Bud Light fell into the political trap of trying to show progressive merits. I agree that a free nation should afford people the right to live the life of their choosing, to practice faith with fear, and to associate or dissociate without judgment. That is freedom. I just think businesses need to appeal to the broadest of populations without obsessing over individual groups. I also do not think social media influencers are good brand ambassadors overall.
I thank you all for experiencing this edition of the CRC Conversation. Make sure to come back next week to experience more here on the Christopher Peter Review.
I thank you for experiencing this episode of the Christopher Peter Review. Please continue to visit the Christopher Peter Review at www.crcreview.com.